What's up, everyone? We are diving back into the multiverse today for another epic. What if Naruto turns out to be a demon son of Konoha and falls in love with Anko, Part 1? If you enjoy this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more fanfics like this. Now, let's dive right into the fanfic. The demon son of Konoha. Naruto Uzumaki had been almost entirely alone for the entirety of his short existence. His only contact came in the form of taunts, beatings and various attempts on his life by the people of his home village. This fateful night found him on the receiving end of his worst beating to date. It was October 10th, his birthday. He had overheard someone once saying that birthdays were a time of celebration, and so he had decided that since today was his birthday, he would go to that little ramen stand he had seen near his apartment. He had already been literally thrown out of many other restaurants near his home, but he hoped this one was different. Especially since he hadn't seen the Hokage for over a week, which was why he hadn't eaten in the 3 days, since the food he had run out. Unfortunately, the newly 4-year-old boy had barely made it 10 steps from his apartment complex, when he was struck in the back of his head, causing him to stumble and fall to the ground. He began to cry softly, as he had learned long ago that to make any kind of loud noise outside was a bad idea. Slowly, he got to his knees and turned to see a crowd of dozens of villagers with various improvised weapons approaching him quickly. Naruto could do nothing but watch as they gathered around him, taunting and jeering him about things he didn't understand. One of the larger men, the leader apparently, stepped forward and grabbed the defenseless child by his collar and dragged him to a nearby alley. Naruto didn't even bother trying to struggle. He had learned the hard way that resisting only made the eventual beating worse. So he did what he always did in these disturbingly frequent circumstances. He tried his best to block out the pain and pretend that he was somewhere else, somewhere where children weren't beaten for no reason or taunted and jeered everywhere they went, somewhere where he would have parents like all the other kids, parents that would hold him and comfort him and keep him safe and tell him that everything was going to be alright. But this place wasn't real. This wasn't the world that Naruto lived in. In the real world he was beaten, he was tormented constantly and certainly didn't have parents or anyone. In the real world, he was alone. Normally the villagers would lose interest after beating the child for a while. It was hard to be angry at something that small when it did absolutely nothing to stop you, just sat there staring with a blank look on its face. But tonight was different. Tonight, where there was usually the gradual reduction in anger and violence, there was only more hate, and as the slaughter continued it only grew and increased, as did the severity of their attacks. Soon Naruto reached his limit of what he could block out and was forced to acknowledge the blows that continued to rain down on his already fragile form. Having come back, he soon gave them what they wanted, the thing that they desired more than anything else in that moment. He screamed. He showed them the pain that they were inflicting on him. He bared his soul in that scream, letting out all of the pain and anguish that had plagued him in the years since he had last given them this satisfaction. All at once, the assault stopped as the attackers relished in pride as the object of their hatred and violence finally validated their efforts by proving that the monster was not impervious to pain and suffering as many had speculated. And yet, for some of them this was not what they had expected. This was not the enraged roar of a demon lord. It was the muffled and pained cry of a small child that had suffered more than all of them combined. This wasn't the glorious victory they had expected. Far from it, this felt like their greatest defeat, their greatest shame. They were not heroes punishing a demon, they were villains assaulting an innocent child. And it tore these select few to shreds. Finally the boy's cries died down as he lost his battle with consciousness and was finally taken from the pain. As the lead attacker looked down at the limp body of the infant he and his accomplices had destroyed, he felt no shame, no regret, no sorrow, only hatred and anger and pride. Slowly he bent down and picked the body up, holding it tightly around the throat. He would finish it tonight. And tomorrow he would be proclaimed a hero, greater than even the Yondaime, as he would succeed where the legendary Yellow Flash failed. He would kill the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Before he could finish his task, however, he felt his grip loosen and his body go limp, forcing him to release the child as he fell to the ground in a sagging heap. The boy, however, did not fall. Instead he was caught by a pair of aged but powerful arms covered by loose white sleeves. The attacker looked up helplessly from his position from the ground as the child he had attempted to kill was cradled to the robed chest of Hiruzen Sarutobi, the Sandaime Hokage of Konoha. Naruto found a few things both interesting and confusing as he woke. Firstly, and most notably, he wasn't in any pain. In fact, he felt better than he had in a long time. This was shocking since even with his oddly rapid healing, he should be feeling the effects of a beating like the one he had received. Shrugging it off since it was a good thing, he focused on the second thing that he noticed: he had absolutely no idea where he was. Usually when he woke from one of his encounters with the villagers, he would be either where he passed out, in his bed, in the hospital, or in the Hokage's office if he was lucky, cause that meant he got to eat and see the man he affectionately referred to as Gigi. But this was none of those places. It looked like a clearing in the middle of a really dense forest, like the ones he could see when he looked out the village gates sometimes. But if that's where I am, who brought me here? And why? If they wanted to kill me, why not do it in the village? He said to himself, assuming whoever brought him here wasn't around at the moment since he couldn't see anyone. I assure you, Naruto, I have absolutely no interest in seeing you dead. Quite the opposite, in fact. I brought you here to start a process that will make it so you never have to fear for your life again. Naruto quickly spun around to find the source of the voice and was shocked to see a gigantic, red fox with 9 tails lying casually behind him. Had Naruto been any other child on the planet, he probably would have screamed and fainted at the sight of the enormous creature. But for some reason he couldn't explain, he didn't feel threatened by the huge beast, rather he felt oddly at ease, as if the fox was a familiar source of comfort and protection, making him feel safe and warm, like he imagined a parent's embrace would feel. Wow, a cool tails, Naruto said dumbly, unsure of what his reaction should be. The fox chuckled, causing a surprisingly strong burst of wind to hit Naruto, almost making him fall. Of all the things I thought you could have said in this situation, I honestly didn't expect that. You trolly or something, Naruto, the fox said happily. Naruto rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. Thanks. So who are you? And where are we? Straight to business, Oh well. Simply put, I am the Kyuubi no Kitsune and we are currently inside of your mind. For a few moments Naruto stared blankly at the self-proclaimed demon fox, then shook his head and said, the Kyuubi no Kitsune, as in the demon fox that attacked the village 4 years ago and was killed by the Yondaime Hokage. But how is that possible? You're supposed to be dead, and what do you mean, we're in my mind? What's really going on here, Foxy? Naruto said as forcefully as he could. The fox quirked an eyebrow then let out a sigh. Look, Naruto, the story that you were told isn't entirely true, in fact most of it is total crap. Naruto plopped down unceremoniously and stared at the fox. Well then tell me what really happened. Okay, but it might be a bit easier to explain in my other form. The fox said as he began to shrink rapidly and his fox features started morphing into more human ones. When he was finished, Naruto was sitting across from a normal-looking blonde man. Naruto couldn't help but feel as though he had seen the man before, but couldn't place where or when. You see, Naruto, the Kyuubi no Kitsune was only one name I was known by, the other was in this form, as Minato Namikaze, the Yondaime Hokage. Naruto's eyes widened to near comical levels and his jaw dropped completely open. But how? The Yondaime killed the Kyuubi, how could that be if you were the same thing? Naruto asked when he finally regained enough of his composure to speak normally. Well, that's a long story. You see, originally I was just the Kyuubi and for more than 1,000 years, I was feared and revered as the most powerful of all the demons. But after a millennium of nothing but wandering aimlessly from one pointless battle to the next, I was sick of it. So, about 30 years ago, I decided to give up the demon life and try being a human for a while. I transformed into my human form and wandered around looking for somewhere I could call home. Eventually, I stumbled across Konoha and I fell in love with it straight away. It was so different to everything I knew. The people were happy and kind and polite to one another. They all lived together almost like one big family. I decided that this was where I wanted to live, so I set up a meeting with Sarutobi-sama since he was the leader of the village. I had intended to try and pass myself off as a traveler looking to settle down, but somehow, he saw through my transformation and asked me who I really was. I explained my story to him and he agreed to let me stay in the village. He even suggested that I become a ninja so that I could be put to good use. I agreed, but there was a problem. People would be suspicious if an incredibly powerful ninja no one had ever heard of suddenly appeared and started fighting for the village. So we devised a solution. I was to transform into a child and attend the ninja academy, altering my appearance so it looked like I grew over time. That way, when I became powerful, people wouldn't be as suspicious. I was thrilled, since it not only gave me a chance to protect my new home eventually, but it would also let me experience the normal human life as I had so greatly desired for so long. As time passed, I grew up. When I graduated from the academy, I was selected to be apprenticed to Jiraiya of the Sannin. With the combination of his training and my existing power, I quickly established myself as a powerful new ninja. Eventually life went on. I got promoted to Junin and took on a team. I even found a woman that I could love and share my secret with. After a while, I was named the Yondaime Hokage and my dear Kushina fell pregnant with our first child. Everything was perfect. However, on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, the day my son was born, everything went to hell. A masked ninja, I still don't know who, snuck into Kushina's hospital room while she was resting and I was out dealing with other business. The man stopped as he tried to gain control of his emotions. He killed her while she slept. Stabbed her right through the heart. She never even woke up. I immediately felt something was wrong and returned to the room, just in time to see the masked nin grab my precious son and leap out of the window, heading away from the village. Overflowing with emotions, I chased after him. I caught up to him just outside the village walls, and by that time, I was experiencing greater hatred and despair than I had ever felt. In the overwhelming flood of emotions, my control slipped and I lost my transformation, reverting back to my original form. Having not seen what happened, the Leaf Nin were understandably panicked by the sudden appearance of a legendary demon, and in their panic and fear, they began to attack me. As I was too emotional for rational thought at the time, the only thing that occurred to me was that the people I had fought and worked so hard for were betraying me, that on top of the grief from losing Kushina and the anger and worry from seeing my son taken, I simply lost it. I began attacking indiscriminately, killing everyone that I could get to, in the hopes of satisfying my anger and rescuing my son. After some time with no sign of the kidnapper or my boy, I noticed someone standing on what looked like Gambunta, the head of the Toad Summons and a good friend of mine. Only it wasn't Bunta, and standing on the fake Bunta's head was someone who looked just like me, and he was holding my son. The next thing I knew, there was this huge flash of light and the Shinigami appeared before me. He ripped my soul and chakra from my body and tried to devour me, but instead I struck a deal with him. Rather than eat me, he proposed to seal me into my son so that I could protect him and give him my great power. In return, I would promise to, through my son, kill certain people that had been breaking his rules. I agreed to the terms and it was done. I was sealed into my only son, and that son was you, Naruto. I am your father. Naruto was quiet for a long time after the man claiming to be his father had finished speaking. He just sat there staring at him, trying to take in all he had heard. If what you say is true, then you are my father, as well as being an infamous demon and the man who everyone had told me killed it. Not only that, but you have also apparently been sealed inside of me since I was born. Assuming that all this is true, why haven't I heard about it before, and why does everyone think that the Yondaime is dead? And why the hell haven't you been protecting me like you said you would? The demon Hokage father looked at him sadly. The reason you were never told the truth was, firstly, because only about 3 people alive today know what really happened, and they decided that it would be best to wait until you were old enough to deal with the information. As far as everyone else knows, the Yondaime Hokage died when he sealed the Kyuubi into you, and nobody but the Hokage knows that you are my son. As for not protecting you, well, I tried the best I could. I always healed your wounds quickly and dulled your pain receptors to avoid most of the pain, but I could only do so much without contacting you, and until tonight that was impossible. I'm so sorry that I couldn't help you as much as either of us would have liked, son, but I promise that from this day on, I will do everything I can to make it up to you and ensure that you are never defenseless again. And how do you plan to do that? Naruto asked skeptically. If you'll let me, I'm going to train you to utilize not only your own dormant powers, but mine as well. Naruto nodded, but was clearly still unsure of whether or not to believe what he had been told. Look, Naruto, I know that you're going to have a hard time believing all of this, and frankly that's a good thing, because being too trusting can be very dangerous in this world. So I want you to talk to the Hokage once you wake up, he will confirm everything that I've told you. Okay, is there anything else? Naruto asked awkwardly. Yeah, please tell him that I'm not happy with how you have been treated, and as soon as I figure out how, I'm gonna be having some harsh words with him. Naruto nodded again and looked around the clearing. How do I get out of here? Oh, don't worry, I'll do it for you, you should be waking up soon anyway. Before you go, Naruto, I just want you to know that your mother and I always loved you greatly, and I'm truly sorry that I haven't been able to do much for you so far, he said sadly, hanging his head. Naruto nodded solemnly, unsure of what he should feel or do in the situation, so he decided to try and remain neutral until he spoke with the Hokage. His body then began to fade and it felt as though he was being pulled off to somewhere else. Sarutobi was not having a good night. In fact, this would probably go down as one of the worst nights of his long life, still surpassed by the Kyuubi incident, and a few rough times during wars, but still, it would be in the top 10, and it wasn't over yet. He had been heading over to Naruto's house to celebrate the young boy's birthday and check up on him, since he'd been especially busy this last week and hadn't been able to visit him like he normally would. On his way to the apartment, he had heard a commotion and gone to investigate. What he found when he got to the source made him angrier and more disgusted than he had been since he discovered Orochimaru's labs years ago. He found Naruto, already bloody and bruised, being choked by a random villager, whilst a crowd of literally dozens of people either watched or cheered for the demon child's demise. He had only barely managed to restrain himself and only knocked the man out rather than kill him where he stood. Luckily, the child was still alive, and with his healing, he would hopefully be okay within a few hours. He didn't want to think about what he would have done if the boy was dead. He shook his head to rid himself of such unhelpful thoughts for the moment. Turning his eyes once more to the boy resting on the lounge in his office, he noticed that he was beginning to stir. Gigi. The boy squeaked out weakly as he opened his eyes and tried to sit up. Sarutobi helped the boy into a more comfortable position before returning to his chair next to the lounge. That's right, Naruto, how are you feeling? He asked, clearly concerned. Naruto groaned and held his head, like I was beaten to a pulp then choked, other than that I'm just peachy. Oh, unless you count the rather interesting dream I had while I was out. Naruto answered bitterly. Sarutobi's eyes widened, not only at the possible implications of a dream, but also his tone. Naruto was never bitter or angry, he was always happy and laughing. Oh, what kind of dream was it? The Hokage asked, trying to hide his concern with a fake happy tone. It didn't work. The kind of dream where a giant fox tells you that he's been sealed in you all your life, and that before that, he was known as the Kyuubi no Kitsune and Minato Namikaze, the Yondaime Hokage, you know, that kind of dream. The fake smile dropped instantly and was replaced with a sad expression, accentuated with an equally sad sigh. I see. And I assume I can't convince you it was just a dream, can I? Naruto shook his head seriously. The Hokage sighed again. Why don't you tell me what he told you, and I'll fill in any blanks and make sure that what he's told you is true. And so Naruto explained all that he had been told during his encounter with the demon-turned-Hokage-turned-prisoner. When he was finished, Sarutobi sighed again. I always did wonder what really happened that night. Naruto, I assure you everything that he has told you is true. Minato was also the Kyuubi and your father, and he is currently sealed within you. I see. So I really do have a father, huh? And he just happens to be both the greatest hero and villain this village has ever known. And the reason that I have been hated and scorned all this time was because he is sealed inside me. And now he wants to somehow train me so that I can use both my own and his power to kill some people who pissed off the Shinigami, so I can honor a deal that I had no say in and to this date has brought me nothing but pain and suffering. HMPF. Real great birthday. Oh, that reminds me, I was going to take you shopping as your birthday present tomorrow. We can pick up some things you'll need for your training while we're at it, the Hokage added with a warm smile. Naruto returned the smile. Sure, Gigi, I'd like that. For now though, can I sleep here? I'm exhausted and I don't wanna risk another trip outside tonight. The Hokage nodded and gave another warm smile. Of course Naruto, good night. And with that he turned off the lights and left. He had to deal with a certain silver-haired, PRN-loving Anbu that was supposed to have been guarding the boy. Time skip 9 years later. Iruka was standing in front of his class on the day of the Genin exams. Today, the children that he had nurtured and trained for the past several years would be taking their final exams to see if they had what it takes to become true ninja of the village hidden in the leaves. He was snapped out of his thoughts by a knock on the door. Come in, he said curiously, as he was not expecting anyone. The door opened to reveal a young man wearing loose black cargo pants with extra pockets that appeared to contain various weapons and scrolls. He wore a skin-tight blood-red shirt that showed off his obviously well-sculpted body, one that could only have been earned through countless hours of intense training. Over the shirt, he wore a black mesh shirt that many nin wear to protect against minor cuts and scrapes, and over that, he wore a black, ankle-length, sleeveless trench coat. On his arms, he had elbow-length black gloves with steel plating on the back for protection. His eyes were blood red, with slitted black pupils like a cat's. His hair was wild and spiked, with the majority being blood red, except for the roots and tips which were black. The lower half of his face was covered by a black cloth mask. Can I help you? Iruka asked, somewhat off-put by the man's intimidating appearance and lack of a Konoha headband, though he was obviously a ninja. I was told by the Hokage to report to this classroom for the Genin exam, the man replied curtly. Iruka quirked an eyebrow as the person was almost as tall as him, and quite obviously much stronger than the average Genin. Oh, and what is your name? He asked. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. Iruka's eyes widened as he recognized the name. As in that Naruto Uzumaki. And what do you mean Namikaze? Wasn't that the Yondaime's last name? Mizuki asked scornfully. The man identified as Naruto narrowed his eyes momentarily before taking a breath and calming himself. Yes, as in that Naruto Uzumaki. And as for why I'm using the Yondaime's name, that's easy, he was my father. He answered plainly, causing everyone present to gasp out in shock and disbelief. Bullshit. The Yondaime never had any children, how dare you claim that demo? Mizuki's voice was cut off as he found himself pressed against the far wall by his throat by a growling Naruto. Now I know you weren't about to break the Sandame's law in front of a room of witnesses, were you? Naruto growled quietly, so only Mizuki and Iruka could hear. Put me down, you ba. He was cut off when Naruto squeezed tighter, increasing the pressure on the Chunin's neck. Because I'm sure you're aware of the punishment for doing so, aren't you? Naruto increased the pressure again, causing Mizuki's eyes to widen as his face turned purple. Naruto, release him, Iruka commanded. Naruto hesitated for a moment, then chuckled, fine, but you only get one warning. He said, slamming Mizuki into the wall slightly, before releasing him and letting him slide limply down the wall. He then stepped away and looked around the room at the shocked faces of the other students. What? He asked innocently. The entire room broke into chaos as everyone yelled questions and demanded explanations from the new student. After a few moments, Iruka used his big head jutsu, causing everyone to instantly be silent and return to their seats. Okay, now that you've all settled down, Naruto, why don't you grab a seat while we get started with the examinations? And so you know I will not tolerate any fighting in my class, is that understood? Yes, Iruka-san, though you know as well as I, that what I did was in line with the Hokage's wishes, he replied as he walked up the stairs, taking a seat next to Shikamaru, who had been asleep on the desk throughout the whole ordeal. That may be, but I assure that won't happen again, isn't that right, Mizuki? He said in a threatening tone. An angry grunt was all he received from the outraged Chunin, who had only just gotten back to his feet. Anyway, we will now be beginning the first part of the exam. This portion is a written test with 20 questions, you have half an hour to answer the questions. No talking or cheating. Begin. He said as each student received their paper. Naruto glanced at his paper and scowled as he detected a genjutsu on it. Guess this is why you didn't want me coming here to learn, Eh2-san. He thought. Exactly. These idiots would have been pulling this kind of shit your whole time here. Just dispel it so we can finish this and get the hell out of here, replied his father's voice. Naruto smirked and performed the genjutsu dispelling technique silently, so as to not arouse the suspicion of the teachers. After the illusion was gone, the questions on the paper changed and were now considerably easier, not that it really mattered since he could have answered the others anyway. Within 5 minutes, he completed the exam and put his head down on the table to have a nap. Shikamaru, who had actually been awake the whole time, chuckled softly at the new student's attitude. I like this guy already, handles shit when necessary, then sits back and relaxes. My kind of guy. He thought to himself as he finished and followed the other boys' lead 5 minutes later. Everyone else was too focused on their own exams to notice the two sleeping genin applicants, well, everyone but Sasuke, who was brooding and sulking about Naruto overpowering a Chunin. Once the time was up, all the tests were collected and Iruka spoke up again. Okay, now that section of the test is complete, we will move on to the next part, the taijutsu test. When your name is read out, you will follow either Mizuki or myself to the training room next door. Once there, you will have a 5-minute spar. To pass, you must land a successful hit on whichever of us you are facing before the time limit runs out. The faster your time, the better your grade, so don't mess around. One by one, the students were led to the back room till finally it came to Naruto, who was going last. I'll take him, Mizuki said with an evil glint in his eye as Naruto strode forward confidently and somewhat bored after the long wait. I don't think that's a goo. Actually, Iruka-san, I would prefer to have Mizuki as my opponent. If that's okay with you. Naruto said coolly. Iruka narrowed his eyes slightly and glanced at both of them before shrugging. Okay. Just remember it's only a spar, okay? He asked pleadingly, though Shikamaru wondered which one he was talking to. Almost immediately after they left the room, there was the sound of a short scuffle and then a tremendous crash, as Mizuki came flying through the dividing wall between the two rooms and landed awkwardly on the front row of desks, practically in Sakura's lap. What the hell happened? Iruka shouted when Naruto strolled casually into the room moments later. Well, as soon as the door closed, he tried to attack me from behind. I blocked a couple of shots and then landed a front kick to his chest, though I think I may have gotten a bit carried away, he said calmly, briefly inspecting the Mizuki-shaped hole in the wall. Iruka sighed and nodded. Okay, just go back to your seat so we can start the next part of the exam. After he got back to his seat, Iruka continued. Now it's time for the final part of the exam, ninjutsu. Normally we would take you one by one into the other room to do this, but since Mizuki is currently incapacitated and there is a big hole in the wall, we'll just do it out here. When I call out your name, each of you will perform a henge, kawarimi, and create at least 3 bunshins. Okay, first up is, as before, the test continued, with Kiba, Choji, Shino, Shikamaru, Sakura, Hinata, Ino and Sasuke all passing easily. Finally, it came to Naruto's turn and everyone was eager to see what the mysterious and surprising newcomer would do. As soon as he made it to the front of the class, he transformed into a perfect replica of Mizuki, though with a sign that said, "I'm a bedwetter," on his back. This made everyone but the still sulking Uchiha and his most diehard fangirls laugh. Even Iruka fought back a chuckle whilst trying to look serious. Very good, now perform a kawarimi, Iruka said as he slowly pulled a full kunai and threw it at Naruto. Just before it hit, there was a puff of smoke followed by a yelp of pain. When the smoke cleared, Sasuke was standing where Naruto was, rubbing his head and sulking even more, whilst Naruto was sitting in the Uchiha's spot with his feet on the desk. You bastard! How dare you do that to Sasuke-kun? Sakura yelled. Naruto turned to her and shuddered. Oh god, fangirls, I thought they would have weeded you out by now, he said in a disgusted tone. The whole class was wide-eyed at this and many of the guys laughed whilst most of the girls were outraged. Iruka sighed again and muttered, I wish, under his breath before clearing his throat and getting everyone's attention again. Very impressive kawarimi, Naruto. Now can you please create 3 bunshins? Naruto nodded and instantly 3 exact copies of him appeared at the front of the class. How the hell did you do that without any hand signs? Kiba yelled. That's the Kage Bunshin Jutsu. I've used it so many times since I was a little kid, that I have mastered it to the point that I don't need to do hand signs anymore. But that's a Junin level forbidden jutsu, how did you learn it? Uruka gasped. My sensei taught it to me when I was 5 to help with my training. There is no way you could have learned a Junin level jutsu that young, you're lying. Sasuke yelled, finally not content with brooding anymore. Naruto shrugged as he walked back to his original seat. Believe what you want, Uchiha, I don't have to answer to you. Sasuke was about to reply when Uruka decided to intervene before things escalated beyond words. That's enough. The exams are now complete. The following people have passed: Shino, Kiba, Shikamaru, Choji, Hinata, Sakura, Sasuke, Ino and Naruto. Those of you that passed, meet here at 8 tomorrow morning for team placements. Everyone else, better luck next time. Dismissed. As everyone was leaving, Sasuke tried to push Naruto, only to end up groping a heavily blushing Sakura's chest after he used a kawarimi and disappeared. Once they were gone, Uruka sighed and looked over to where Mizuki was still lying unconscious. Guess we were just lucky that kid was only here for a day. I don't even want to think about having to put up with this shit for 4 years. With one final shake of his head, he turned out the lights, locked the door and left, forgetting about his incapacitated assistant. The next day found Naruto back in the classroom, once again sitting next to Shikamaru, since the boy seemed to be one of the only people in the class who could refrain from gawking at the mysterious new student. You're a Nara, right? He asked after being seated in silence for a few minutes. The lazy boy slowly raised his head off the desk to look at Naruto. That's right, Naruto wasn't it? The name's Shikamaru Nara. He drawled. Nice to meet you, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. The red-headed boy declared proudly. So was the Yondaime really your father? You don't really look like him, didn't he have blonde hair and blue eyes? The fat boy on the other side of Shikamaru asked. Yeah, I get my looks from my mother mostly. You're an Akamichi, right? Geez, it looks like there is someone from all the major clans here. That's right, and most of us are the heirs too. Weird coincidence really that we'd all be in the same class. Shoji said thoughtfully. Makes sense really. After the Kyuubi attack, people wanted to repopulate, so it's no surprise that there would be so many kids of the same age. The Nara said quietly, unsure of how the self-proclaimed son of the Yondaime would react to the mention of that particular event. Before he could gauge the boy's reaction, Uruka spoke up, quieting the class. Okay, so, all of you have passed the academy test qualifying you to become full genin of Konoha. Before we get to that, I'd like to say a few words. Naruto tuned him out, instead opting to take the time to talk with his tenant. So San, what team do you reckon they'll end up chucking me on? Minato thought for a moment. It's hard to say. It really depends on if they're going for balanced or specialized teams. If it's balanced, each should have a combat specialist, a tracker and a support member. For example, you as the combat, the Inuzuka over there as the tracker and the Yamanaka as the support, since they like to have one female on every team. Naruto nodded mentally. What if they're specialized then? In that case, each team will be organized for a specific purpose, like tracking or assassination. So for this class, they'd probably be the Yamanaka, Nara and Akamichi as capture and interrogation. The Hyuga, Inuzuka and Aburame as the trackers. But what about the rest? Me and the Uchiha might be able to be an assault team, but that leaves us with that pink-haired fangirl, and I doubt she's suited to the task. Crap, I hope they go for balanced. I really don't want to be on a team with a spoiled emo and a useless fangirl. Kyuubi chuckled at his son's comment, but Naruto didn't get any more time to contemplate his possible torture, as Iruka finally finished his speech. And now for the team placements. The first team shall be Shikamaru Nara, Choji Akamichi and ... Quote. Naruto held his breath and crossed his fingers, toes, eyes and anything else he could for luck. Ino Yamanaka. 2 very loud groans were heard, the first from Ino who began whining about not being with Sasuke, and the second from Naruto who, having heard his worst prediction come true, slammed his head into the table and quietly grumbled about life being unfair. Ino's response was not entirely unexpected, but Naruto's raised quite a few eyebrows and a chuckle from Shikamaru, who rubbed the red head's back to console him. Choji, not understanding, whispered to his lazy friend, "What's with him? He looks like someone just told him he can't have dessert for a month. The Nara chuckled again at his chubby friend's comment. He figured out who is gonna be on his team. And he got dealt the two lowest cards in the game. He said cryptically, his voice split between pity and humor. Who'd he get? Shikamaru smirked and nodded towards Iruka, who was continuing his announcement. You'll see. The next team will be Hinata Hyuga, Kiba Inuzuka and Shino Aburame. Choji let out a hearty chuckle when he realized who that left with the grief-stricken newcomer. Ouch. That's rough. Sook to be you, dude. Kiba laughed, having also figured out the final team. Naruto didn't respond. He just continued to wallow in self-pity, his arms now covering his head as if to protect him from his unfortunate fate. Which leaves the final team of Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, Sakura Haruno and Sasuke Uchi. He was cut off by Sakura's screeching cry of victory. This was followed by a broody grunt from the Uchiha and what sounded like quiet weeping from Naruto. Iruka couldn't help but feel sorry for the boy, he had obviously drawn the short stick in life once again. Wow, orphan, scorn of the village, container of the Kyuubi, and now he's got possibly the worst team in the academy's history. Stay away from the casinos, kid, you've got just about the worst luck ever, the scarred Chunin thought to himself. Iruka was snapped out of his ponderings when the door opened, revealing Asuma and Kurenai. Oh good, you're here. Hinata, Kiba, Shino, this is Kurenai Uehi, your new sensei. Ino, Choji, Shikamaru, this is your sensei Asuma Sarutobi. Hearing the name, Shikamaru raised an eyebrow. Sarutobi, as in the Sandaime, he asked, getting everyone's attention except for Naruto's team, who were brooding, fawning or sobbing respectively. Yeah, the old man is my 2-san. Now let's get going. Follow me, Asuma said as he led his team out. Alright, my team, come on, we've got work to do. Kurenai called as she too left with her team. The remaining team sat waiting for 15 minutes before Sakura began to complain. Where the hell? She started but was silenced when Naruto and Iruka suddenly tensed and looked at the window. Wah! She started, but was cut off when the window exploded and a large black ball flew through before unraveling and exposing a banner that read, Anko Mitarashi, C and single Junin interrogation and torture master. Then scribbled underneath it in a hasty scrawl was, and sensei. Everyone just sweat dropped as they read the banner. After they had gotten over most of the shock, Sakura began to screech again. What the H? Oh god, shut the fuck up, shouted a rough, but definitely female voice from behind the banner. Naruto and Sasuke smirked at this, while Sakura looked just about ready to explode. She was about to cry out again, but lost her voice as a purple-haired woman stepped out from behind the banner. She was dressed in a tan trench coat, ninja mesh shirt and a brown leather mini skirt. She also had on combat boots and knee-high leg armor. All in all, the outfit left very little to the imagination. Naruto and Sasuke both lost their smirks instantly at the sight of the strange woman, though the thoughts running through their heads couldn't have been more different. Naruto's brain had all but shut down with perverted thoughts as he mentally screamed, damn. Sasuke on the other hand was more along the lines of, ew, girl bits, nasty. Sasuke quickly turned away, feeling ill from the sight of Anko's womanly features. Sakura looked even more pissed off. And Naruto just kept staring blankly while his brain started to reboot. Anko just smirked at the reactions she drew from the soon-to-be genin, except for Sasuke. His was a little troubling, but she would deal with that later. Alright brats, I'm Anko Mitarashi, your new sensei. Meet me on the roof in 5 minutes. She then vanished in a swirl of leaves, allowing everyone to let out the breaths they didn't know they had been holding. Before they could move though, she reappeared, causing Sakura to fall out of her chair in surprise. And don't be late or I'm coming for you, she said whilst licking a kunai, then vanishing again. A wide grin spread across Naruto's face as he stood up. Oh, I like her, he said, laughed before leaving in a burst of black and red flames, causing Sakura to fall over again and Sasuke to brood even harder. Naruto arrived on the roof to find Anko laying provocatively on a bench eating a stick of dango. She quirked an eyebrow at him. So you can use the shunshin already? And your own variety too. I'm impressed, Gaki. Maybe you twerps aren't as useless as I thought. Naruto smirked. I'm not, but I can't speak for the other two. One seems to be the token broody Avenger and the other one is the stereotypical rabid fangirl. You've got your work cut out for you. Anko laughed. Well then, Ginger, what does that make you? She asked merrily. Naruto chuckled at the playful insult. Me? Why, I'm the sea and mysterious, yet funny and entertaining hero. Anko snorted out a laugh, which I guess makes you the sea older woman, sensei that is resistant at first, but eventually becomes the hero's love interest. He finished with a smirk that Anko could read clearly after years of dealing with a certain silver-haired shinobi that wore a similar mask to Naruto's. She chuckled at his open flirting, but stopped suddenly and launched a kunai at his head before disappearing. Naruto turned his head and caught the kunai in his mouth, having quickly lowered his mask, before Anko reappeared draped over his shoulder. Nice catch, Ginge, you really might be worth my time, she declared before she leaned in and kissed him, grabbing the kunai from his mouth with her tongue. Once she had it, she immediately pulled back and purred Sally into his ear, though whoever said the sea-sensei had to resist. Naruto blushed heavily at the kiss, the words and the fact that the way she was draped caused her near-exposed brias to rub against his back provocatively. What the hell? Shrieked an all-too-familiar voice, causing both Anko and Naruto to sigh. Some other time, Ginger. She whispered before stepping away from Naruto and facing her two other students who had just arrived. About time you two got here. Now let's get the introductions out of the way so we can get to the good stuff, she said as she sat back on the bench she was on before, while the others took up spots opposite her. Why don't you start, sensei? Sakura asked nervously. Anko sighed. Alright, my name is Anko Mitarashi. I like dango, snakes and screwing with brats. I don't like fangirls or traitors. And my dream has always been to have a lifetime supply of dango, she said happily, staring off into space as she dreamt of her favorite snack. After a full minute, Naruto snapped his fingers, snapping her back to reality. Pinky, why do you go next? She said after shaking her head clear of her fantasy. My name is Sakura Haruno. She looked at Sasuke and giggled, causing all three of the others to sigh and shake their heads. I dislike creeps and perverts. She glared at Naruto who just rolled his eyes, and my dream is, she looked back at Sasuke and giggled again. Before she knew what happened, Anko punched her hard in the stomach, sending her crumpling to the floor. You had better cut that shit right now, cause I promise you that if you don't, I'm sending your pathetic ass back to the academy. I will not have this team in danger because you were too busy being a piece of shit fangirl. Anko roared, terrifying Sakura and Sasuke. Naruto practically had hearts in his eyes as he looked on. "2-san, I think I'm in love," he thought happily. Kyuubi laughed. Well, you could sure as hell do worse, and she didn't seem opposed to the idea. Let's see where things go, shall we? Naruto nodded and focused his attention back on what was happening, just as Anko got back to her seat and Sakura managed to crawl back to hers, though she was still cradling her wounded gut. Okay, duck ass, your turn, Anko said looking at Sasuke. The Uchiha growled angrily but spoke up anyway. My name is Sasuke Uchiha. I don't like anything, and I hate a lot of things. I don't have any dreams, but I do have an goal. I will kill a certain some. He was cut off as he too was punched in the gut by Anko. God damn it, Ginge. I thought you were kidding about these two, she said looking at Naruto, who was sporting a face-splitting grin. Anko sighed and picked the Uchiha up by his collar, bringing him to her eye level, about a foot off the ground for him. Put me down now, you crazy bitch. I am an Uchiha, how dare you touch me? Sasuke shouted furiously. Anko brought her other hand up and punched him square in the mouth, sending him crashing into the railing around the edge of the roof. First of all, don't you ever call me bitch or I will fuck you up so bad, even your fangirls won't be able to tell it's you. Second, I don't give a fuck what your name is, if you want me to treat you with respect, you have to earn it your fucking self. And finally, even if I did care about clans, you're the last Uchiha in Konoha and one person cannot be a clan, so your name is meaningless till you con some pathetic cunt into shitting out some more red-eyed bastards. No offense, Ginge, she added calmly after her tirade. None taken. I hate those jutsu-stealing fucks as much as the next person. Besides, my eyes are way better than their gay ones ever were, he said with a smirk. You worthless trash. I'll kill you. Sasuke shouted as he charged at Naruto with a kunai in hand. Anko moved to step in, but Naruto waved her off. He then grabbed Sasuke's wrist and squeezed so hard a sickening crunch was heard and he dropped the weapon, screaming in agony. Naruto then leapt into the air and performed a perfect spin kick to Sasuke's face, sending him flying several feet before he was embedded into the wall on the opposite side of the roof. Sasuke-kun. Sakura screamed as she ran over to his unconscious form. What the hell is your problem? She cried as she pulled him out of the hold in the wall and clutched him to her chest. Me. That jackass charged me with a kunai after proclaiming that he was going to kill me. I had no choice but to defend myself, he said calmly. But, no buts Sakura. Naruto is right. Sasuke is just damn lucky that Naruto chose not to use deadly force as he would have been well within his rights to do so. Everyone turned to the source of the new voice, to find the Sandaime Hokage himself standing behind them with an upset look on his face. Hey Gigi, how's the paperwork treating ya? Naruto called out happily. Sakura gaped, whilst Anko chuckled at the boy's familiar tone. The old man just sighed and shook his head. Well Naruto, the paperwork wouldn't be quite so much if you could refrain from fighting every new person you meet. I just got finished with Mizuki and now it looks like I've got to figure out a punishment for the little Avenger here. Naruto snorted and crossed his arms grumpily. Hey, it's not my fault Sasuke can't take a joke, right Anko-sensei? Anko just chuckled and shook her head. Don't call him that you creep. Sakura screamed. Naruto shrugged. Hey I just call him like I see him. You saw the way he reacted when Anko-sensei came out. What kinda straight guy would get grossed out by a smokin' hottie like her? Anko chuckled while Sakura looked incensed and the Hokage looked between teacher and student with an amused smirk. Smokin' hottie. Ginge. Anko teased as she sauntered over to him and draped herself over his back again. Naruto shrugged and grinned widely. As I said, I calls em as I see em. Deciding this had gone on long enough, the Hokage cleared his throat, getting everyone's attention. Anbu, he called, immediately making two masked men appear. Sasuke Uchiha here is to be charged with attacking a fellow Leaf Nin with intent to kill. Take him to a holding cell till his punishment is decided. The two men nodded and picked up Sasuke's still limp body and disappeared in a large swirl of leaves. Is he really going to be punished Hokage-sama? Sakura asked quietly, worried about her love obsession. Sarutobi sighed. Yes Sakura he will. Regardless of who he is, his actions deserve punishment and that is what is going to happen. After hearing this Anko and Naruto snorted together. What? The old man asked, as they glanced at each other momentarily. That's bullshit and you know it Gigi. You know as well as we do, that the council will never let anything happen to the precious Uchiha. Naruto spat indignantly. Anko nodded, the brat's right Hokage-sama. If anyone else pulled that shit they'd be locked up for sure. Hell if me or the ginger tried that, we'd be killed on the spot. But we all know that, at most, that little shit stain is gonna get a slap on the wrist. Anko agreed. Sarutobi sighed. I know, but I'm afraid there is nothing I can do. As neither of you are officially genin yet, you're still civilians, which means I don't get final say in punishment. That is why I was unable to punish most of the people that attacked you when you were younger. Sakura seemed to finally tune into the conversation. What do you mean, not officially genin yet? We passed the academy test so aren't we genin now? She asked. Not yet. You may have passed the academy's test but you still have to prove yourselves to me. Tomorrow, we'll be having another test, where I will decide if you can be my students, or if you need to go back to the academy for another year. Anko explained, with a sinister smirk at the mention of her test. Sarutobi's sweat dropped at her expression and backed away slightly from the strange woman. Anyway, I've got a lot of work to do so I have to be going. Naruto if you pass tomorrow come see me and we'll go grab some ramen. Hearing this, the boy cheered loudly and shook his fist in the air. Anko and Sakura sweat dropped at his antics, but the Hokage just chuckled and shunshined away. Okay I think we can call it a day. I want you two to meet me tomorrow at training ground 44 at 8 AM sharp. Don't be late or I'll make what Ginger did to the Uchi ass look like a spa treatment. She then shunshined away, leaving a shaken Sakura and an almost giddy Naruto. I'm gonna marry that woman. he said to himself before using his own shunshin to go home. The following day, 7:55 a.m. had rolled around and found Naruto leaning against the gate that lead into Training Ground 44, or as was painted on the sign, the Forest of Death. At 8 on the dot, Anko appeared in a swirl of leaves with a very disappointed look on her face. Not only did Naruto fail to be surprised by her entrance, but standing a few feet down the fence scowling at the boy, was the still bruised Uchiha. Not even a whole day for attempted murder. Why am I not surprised? She muttered to herself. Where the fuck is Pinky? She screamed, having noticed the absence of her other student. Beats me, she wasn't here when I got here 15 minutes ago. Naruto shrugged. She looked at Sasuke for his contribution, but only received a grunt as he turned back to glaring at Naruto. Anko sighed angrily. Whatever, I'll deal with her when she gets here, assuming she has the guts to show up at all, she stated bitterly before turning to Sasuke and Naruto. Let's get this test started then. Now my test is a little different to the ones that other instructors give. This is because mine is a combined combat and evasion challenge. It's really quite simple. You will both enter the forest. 15 minutes later I will enter and begin hunting you down. Now there are two ways to pass. Firstly, if you are able to land a solid hit on me at any point during the test via any means, then you pass. The second way is if you are somehow able to avoid being captured by me for 2 full hours after I enter the forest, then you pass. At the end of these 2 hours, if you have been captured and have not hit me, then you will fail and I will send you back to the academy. Any questions? Naruto raised his hand. What is it, Ginger Nut? She asked irritably, not happy that he couldn't understand such simple instructions. If I pass, will you go on a date with me? He asked seriously, causing Sasuke to face Vault and Anko to laugh heartily. After a few minutes she regained her composure and looked back to the now pouting Naruto. Tell you what, Gaki, if you can capture me during the test, I'll go anywhere you want, hell I'll even pay, she challenged. Naruto smirked confidently, but before he could respond Sakura ran up, flushed and out of breath. Where the fuck were you? Anko roared, looming threateningly over the flustered girl. I had to get my hair just right and then I couldn't find the right outfit. She was cut off when Anko punched her in the gut, making her collapse to her knees. You were late because you were fucking about with your hair. You are on thin fucking ice, you pathetic little bitch. You had better pull off something pretty fucking spectacular in this test or I'm sending you back to the academy bruised and fucking bald. Your time starts now, so you all better get moving cause I've decided it's gonna be 5 minutes head start, not 15. As soon as she finished, a determined Sasuke, a confused and scared Sakura and a very excited Naruto entered the forest. Immediately, the three young ninja went their separate ways. Well, Sakura tried to follow Sasuke so they could work together, but he quickly left her behind. A minute later, the ever-impatient Anko made her way into the forest. Who to go for first? She thought to herself, smirking at the plans she was already developing for testing the wannabe genin. I think I'll leave Pinky to wander around for a little while, and I'll leave Ginger and his little challenge till last, which leaves Duck Ass as my first victim. Should keep the other two on their toes though. She created to cage bunchins and sent them after Naruto and Sakura whilst the real one quickly picked up Sasuke's trail. Naruto had created 50 cage bunchins as soon as he got into the forest and sent each of them off in a different direction. He then hid himself inside a small burrow that one of the bunchins stumbled on, dispelling itself and telling him where it was. He smirked when another bunchin was destroyed after a few minutes by what it identified as an Anko cage bunchin. So she's coming early. I like that in a woman. Naruto thought to himself, earning a perverted giggle from Kyuubi. I don't think so. If that was a cage bunchin, then chances are the real one is going after someone else first. Naruto thought for a moment before grinning deviously. Just cause it's a cage bunchin doesn't mean we can't have some fun with it. He thought before creating 10 stronger clones and sending them out to find the Anko clone. The real Anko was currently on the trail of her broodiest potential student. He had tried to cover his tracks and even set a few low-level traps, but for a seasoned Junin like Anko, they barely even slowed her down. Soon, she had caught up to the emo Avenger, but just when she was about to pounce, her mind was flooded with foreign memories, causing her to lose focus for a moment and slip off the branch she had been resting on, sending her tumbling through a few more, before she regained her balance and halted her painful descent. What the fuck? One of them actually beat my clone, she thought as she tried to sort out the jumble of memories that had been passed on to her. She had to stop herself from laughing when she finally sorted out what had happened. Flashback. Anko's Bunshin had just taken out 2 more of Naruto's original Bunshins when she was surrounded by 10 more. Anko was able to defeat 2 of them immediately, but then they seemed to get serious and she started having more trouble. After a few exchanges, she had managed to take out 4 more, but the 4 remnants managed to subdue her by each grabbing onto a limb. As she struggled, another Naruto appeared in a burst of flames. Anko stopped struggling and smirked. I take it that you are the original? She asked confidently. The new Naruto grinned and have a simple nod. That's right, and I have a little message for your boss, he said, walking up to the clone so they were eye to eye. Oh, and what's that blood nut? She teased. Naruto chuckled. This, he declared simply before leaning in, quickly lowering his mask and kissing the Bunshin on the lips. Anko resisted at first but then allowed herself to be drawn into the kiss, opening her mouth to allow him entrance, which he gladly accepted. After a few moments of passion, he pulled back and looked directly into her eyes. Hurry up with the others, I'm waiting. He then smacked the Bunshin on the eyes, dispelling it. End flashback. Not bad, Gaki, you've sure got the moxie, but I wonder if you really have what it takes, she thought to herself before recommencing her chase on the Uchiha. Sakura was becoming more anxious with every second that passed. After she had lost Sasuke, she continued to search for him for another 10 minutes before she was attacked by some wild pigs. She managed to escape from them by scrambling up a tree, where she had been hiding for the last 20 minutes. She wouldn't have been quite so frightened if it wasn't for the Anko clone that had appeared shortly after she climbed the tree and whispered, "I'm coming for you," in her ear before vanishing again. She would have left the tree to find a better hiding spot, but the pigs were still lurking around its base and she simply didn't have the agility to jump to another tree. So she just sat there, cradling her knees and sobbing quietly, chanting, "Sasuke-kun will come and rescue me," repeatedly in her head. Anko was smiling brightly as she looked down on her prey from her vantage point in a nearby tree. So this is the great, last Uchiha. I've gotta say, I'm not impressed at all so far. Even that pink-headed fangirl did a better job of hiding than this, she said as she leapt down into the opening he was resting in. She almost frowned when he didn't act surprised, but it wasn't that impressive that he sensed her since she wasn't really trying to conceal herself. Who says I was hiding? The only reason I ran was for the warm-up and to find a nice clearing. Since I've done both of those, there was no need to keep going, he said confidently, with an arrogant smirk slathered on his face. Anko almost peeked thinking about how she was about to rid him of that smirk. Well, if you've been waiting, let's not delay this anymore, she purred as she pulled a kunai and slipped into her fighting stance. Sasuke said nothing as he did the same, his smirk spreading even wider. Anko quickly charged and attempted a predictable horizontal slash, which Sasuke easily blocked. She then followed it up with a low kick and was pleasantly surprised when he managed to jump it, then counter with a kick aimed at her head. The brat isn't as bad as I thought, she thought as she blocked his kick and threw him towards a nearby tree. Sasuke turned in the air to land feet first against the tree, then push-up, launching himself back towards the purple-haired Junin. Anko was surprised by the tactic, but was still able to counter, using his momentum and leverage to slam him hard into the forest floor after she avoided the attack. Sasuke felt the air forced from his lungs, but was able to recover quickly and was soon on his feet facing a bored-looking Anko who was leaning against a tree twirling her kunai. I'm so disappointed. Here I was expecting to struggle against the famous Uchiha clan's strength, and all I get is some punk kid with subpar taijutsu. Anko teased, trying to get a rise out of the stoic Avenger. I think I finally get why Itachi killed your little clan. I think he was worried that people might figure out that, other than him, the Uchiha were just a bunch of inbred pusses living off their ancestors' reputations. Instantly Sasuke roared and charged her recklessly, swinging wildly with his kunai. Anko sighed internally. His form isn't bad, but he is baited way too easily, and once he loses all technique and becomes a liability at best. This kid is definitely not ready, she thought as she easily avoided all of the boy's attacks, which caused him to become more frustrated and even less composed. I've seen enough, she said seriously as she used a shunshin to appear behind him and knock him out with a firm shot to the back of the head. Anko shook her head as she created a cage bunshin to carry the boy and leapt off to her next applicant. The cage bunshin looked down at the boy with disgust, snickering as it kicked him in the ribs before picking up the unconscious Uchiha and taking him out of the forest to wait for the others. Anko Mitarashi was, for the first time in a long while, unsure of how she should react to a situation. Once she was done with Sasuke, she left to check on Sakura, curious to see how she was dealing with the emotional portion of the test. What she found was, at the same time, both incredibly hilarious and unbelievably disgusting. She had been expecting the pink-haired wannabe ninja to be hauled up in a cave or similar hiding place, scared, but still determined to defend herself. Instead, she found a pathetic, weeping heap in the same place as her clone found her, curled into the fetal position, praying for Sasuke-kun to come rescue her. Having quickly lost the humor in the situation, Anko was left only with disgust and rage. She was visibly shaking as she walked over to the ninja and kicked her hard, sending her out of the tree and crashing hard to the ground. Sakura screamed loudly, both from pain and surprise since she had been too preoccupied to notice Anko's arrival till the snake summoner announced her presence. She slowly rolled over, wincing at the sharp pain in her ribs and left arm, and found an enraged Anko looming over her with a kunai clenched tightly in her hand. What the fuck is wrong with you? If I was an enemy or even a fucking squirrel, I could have killed you right now without you even noticing. Are you really so pathetic that you can't even keep it together for half an hour in a controlled test environment? What the fuck were they thinking letting a puddle of shit like you graduate from the academy? Anko roared as she began to lose control and felt the familiar burning sensation of her curse mark activating. Wincing in pain, she stepped away and took some deep breaths to calm herself before turning back to Sakura's quaking visage. Not only have you failed my exam, but I will also be advising the Hokage that he not let you back into the academy. If I can help it, you will never be a ninja. She then turned to leave, but Sakura interrupted her departure. You can't leave, she started to plead before she was knocked out and carried off by the cage bunshin that had returned from disposing with Sasuke. Thanks, she said to her clone. No problem, and try to cheer up, you've still got the sea redhead left to play with, the bunshin said before jumping away, leaving a surprised Anko. Sexy redhead, stupid clones and their lowered inhibitions, she muttered before smirking. She has a point though, the kid sure is hot for a 13-year-old. And that kiss with my bunshin was fucking incredible. She then laughed before leaping into the trees. Get ready, Ginger, I'm coming, she thought happily as she raced to his last known location. Soon she had found where her bunshin had been when it was dispelled, but there were so many tracks leaving the scene in different directions, that it would be impossible to tell which set belonged to the original. Luckily Anko's problem was solved, when Naruto appeared next to her on the branch she was on. She almost jumped in surprise since she hadn't noticed him, but was able to control the reflex. Hey Ginge, from the prince down there, it looks like you've been busy, she said cheerfully whilst keeping her guard up in case he tried anything. Oh, we have been. The boss wanted to make sure that you saw an example of our evasion skills, he declared proudly. Anko quirked an eyebrow at the cheery redhead. Boss, I take it that means you're a clone. He nodded happily. Mind telling me why you are here if your boss wanted to show off his evasion skills? She asked. Oh, that's easy. The boss wanted to prove that we are more than capable of evading capture, so he set this up, since we figured this would be the first place you'd check. As for why I'm here, the answer is simple, to take you to the boss, he declared merrily, again earning a quirked eyebrow from Anko. Why would he want to lead me to him? She asked, caught between being suspicious of Naruto's plan and amused at the bunshin's enthusiasm. He said that he wanted to face you with honor, not just capturing you through a sneak attack, the bunshin said seriously, once again surprising the Junin. I see. So he provided a demonstration to prove his evasive skills, even though he didn't actually want to evade me. Impressive. Stupid and reckless, but impressive. Okay, let's go Bunshin Jinj, I think your boss needs straightening out, she said happily. The Bunshin laughed. Maybe so, Enheim, he declared before racing ahead. Anko almost fell off the branch she was on, but regained her composure and smirked. Enheim, huh, I guess we'll have to see if the original Naruto has the balls to call me that, and then if he's got the skills to keep him after he does, she thought as she sped up to avoid losing the Bunshin. After a little while, the Bunshin came to a stop on a branch overlooking a small clearing. Down there, Anko asked as she landed next to the Naruto. Yep, see you soon Enheim, he said before whacking himself on the head, causing him to dispel. Anko chuckled and shook her head before leaping into the clearing. She found herself standing 20 feet from a relaxed-looking Naruto, who was sitting against a tree reading a familiar orange book. Aren't you a little young for that, Ginger? She teased. Naruto chuckled as the book vanished in a puff of smoke and he stood up. Maybe in biological years, but with the way my life is, you mature pretty quickly. Besides, I know quite a few very powerful ninja who happen to love the series, so it's not like I'm the only one, he said nonchalantly. Oh really? And who might these powerful nins be? Anyone I know, she asked playfully, recognizing his attempt at changing the subject from his quality of life. Naruto smirked. Well, you for one, since you're obviously familiar with them. But there is also the silver-haired guy that first stole this copy off, several members of Anbu and of course the Hokage himself. Wait, you stole that off a silver-haired guy? What did he look like? She asked, trying desperately to hold in her laughter about the esteemed Hokage reading smut. Well, at the time he was wearing a standard Chunin outfit, along with one of these masks, he pointed at his mask, but I recognized him from when he was one of my Anbu guards when I was little. He was one of the ones who let the villagers get to me, so I figured I'd get back at him, so I stole his books and these cool masks. Anko finally broke out laughing so hard, she actually fell down and took several minutes to regain the ability to speak coherent sentences. You really are something else, Red. The guy you described as Kakashi Hatake, former Anbu captain and generally hailed as one of Konoha's most powerful ninjas. People have been trying to get him without his mask for decades, and not only did you steal them, but you also got his favorite book and then you walk around in public showing them off. When word gets out about this, you're either gonna be dead or a legend, she said happily as she wiped a tear from her eye from laughing so hard. Better than him have tried and failed, I'm not worried, he said confidently. Anko sighed and nodded, all right, whatever you say. So do you wanna start this honorable fight of yours or not? She asked seriously, slipping into her fighting stance. Naruto frowned at her. How do you know that style? He asked seriously. I learned it from my sensei. She replied, spitting the word sensei like it was poison. I see. That explains it. He sighed. Explains what? She asked, becoming both suspicious and frustrated with this line of questioning. What you said to Gigi yesterday about either of us being killed if we attacked someone. I was trying to figure out why you would be in the same boat as me and I just realized why. To know that style, you must have been Orochimaru's student before he left. And I'm assuming that since he turned traitor, the village hates you almost as much as they do me, he said seriously. Immediately, Anko had him by his throat against a tree. Spill it. How the fuck did you recognize that cunt's style? And how do you know all this? And how the hell are you so powerful? There is no way a genin would be able to do a tenth of what you can. Tell her, Naruto. If you want her to be the one, she needs to know the truth. Kyuubi advised his son. Naruto sighed and looked into her eyes. Do you really want to know? Because the honest answer to those questions is a SS-ranked secret, that only me and the Hokage know. Are you ready for that kind of responsibility? Can you be trusted with it? He asked seriously, with enough authority and power in his voice to startle Anko into letting him go and backing away. After a few moments of looking at the ground, she looked into his eyes and nodded. Please, I want to know the truth. Naruto nodded and told her all about Kyuubi being his father and the Hokage, about the conspiracy to seal him and about his secret training for the last 9 years. When he was finished, almost an hour later, Anko was speechless for the first time in years. After a few minutes, she finally spoke up. I assume the Hokage can confirm all of this. She asked. Of course, just be careful about how and where you bring it up. As I said, it's a SS ranked secret, and I'm sure you can understand why. The purple-haired woman nodded seriously. Yeah, if any part of that got out, the village would go to shit in an hour. Though, I do still have a few questions. Firstly, just how strong are you? In this form, without releasing my demon chakra, about mid-Junin. With my demon chakra, maybe cage level. Anko's eyes widened considerably. What if you used your two sans chakra? Naruto rubbed the back of his head in thought. Assuming I could draw it all out and my body could handle it, I would be even stronger than he was when the village attacked him. But my body can't take that much just yet. If it was all mine, maybe, but because it's still considered a foreign chakra, so my body just can't handle that much at one time. Which is why Tu-san has been releasing a steady stream into me for a few years now, so it can be converted and added to my chakra. Makes sense, but if you're that powerful, why are you being put onto a team as a genin? Why not skip ahead? Naruto sighed again. The main reason is because the council wouldn't let Gigi do it. If he had, they could force him to step down and then they might elect some puppet as new Hokage, and I can't let that happen, he said determinedly. Anko nodded. Absolutely, those fucks have too much power as it is, we don't need one of them as Hokage too. But what else? There are ways around that if need be. Naruto looked away nervously. Well, you see, Tu-san thinks that I'm too alone, since I don't really know anyone but him and Gigi. He said this would be a good way to meet people. He said quietly. Wait, your Tu-san is making you go through the ranks with a team so you can make friends. She laughed. Naruto rubbed his head again. Not exactly. Sea demons have this thing. When they come of age and they get a massive increase in their power, the catch is to go through the ritual you need a mate. He sighed. Anko stared at him slack-jawed for a moment before bursting out laughing again. So your Tu-san is making you go through the ranks to find some, she stopped and her eyes widened. Is that why you came up with that challenge? So you can make me into some ritual fuck toy? She screamed, grabbing him by the collar of his coat. Naruto panicked and waved his hands in what he hoped was in placating fashion. No, nothing like that, I just really like you and I wanted to get to know you better in a casual setting, he sputtered nervously. Anko gripped him tighter. So you tricked me into accepting a challenge I have no hope of winning. She growled accusingly. Naruto growled back and grabbed her hands, yanking them loose then reversing their positions so she was against the tree. He smashed his lips against hers in a passionate kiss that caught her completely off guard. After he pulled back, she breathlessly looked into his captivating red eyes. I promised Tu-san and Gigi that I wouldn't use my demon chakra anywhere near the village or with anyone who didn't know the truth, since it would probably cause a riot, so I was never going to go past my current state in our match. So we would be on almost even terms. In fact, I think, as it stands, with your experience, you would have the advantage. I may be a lot of things, but I have my honor. Naruto then released her hands and stepped away, letting her stand freely. Suddenly she smirked and coased her hip. Okay then, let's do this thing. But I should warn you, I'm not going easy on you. If you want that date, you're gonna have to earn it, she declared as she drew to kunai. Naruto smirked as he slipped into a fighting stance Anko had never seen before. I wouldn't have it any other way, he said happily as she charged and their battle began. Anko lunged, swiping at Naruto with first her right, then left kunai. She continued to attack him ferociously for several minutes, but other than a few light scratches that healed instantly, she was unable to connect. This, combined with the fact that Naruto had yet to even attempt an attack, was beginning to piss her off. Quickly shifting her tactics, she feigned a slash but connected with a low kick when he dodged the kunai. Naruto lost his footing and fell, but was able to avoid a stab aimed at his heart and get back to his feet. I told you to take this seriously. What's this no attacking bullshit? Anko cried as she breathed hard from several minutes of intense, non-stop attacks. Naruto smirked. I was just taking some time to feel you out, but I can assure you that is over now. Shall we continue? He asked, once again getting into his unusual stance. Anko growled and charged at him again, but this time he evaded her attack and countered with a hard chop to her wrist, forcing her to drop one of the kunai as the hand went limp. While she was preoccupied with this event, Naruto landed a hard knee to her gut and followed it with a back kick that sent her flying into a tree. Shit, the kid sure as hell has some power behind his hits. I haven't felt a blow like that since last time I sparred with Guy, she thought as she clutched her ribs. Clenching her teeth and ignoring the pain, Anko picked herself up just in time to avoid a drop kick from Naruto that made an impressive crack in the large tree she was leaning on. The redhead then pushed off the tree, launching himself at Anko, only to be caught and flipped using his own momentum to plow him into the dirt. Are they teaching that in the academy or something? 'Cause the Uchiha tried that exact same trick when I whooped his ass earlier, she taunted as she walked over to his motionless frame. Come on, I hope you aren't that soft. You should have been able to take that, she said as she stomped lightly on his back, only for the body to go up in a puff of smoke. Cage Bunshin, shit, when did he make that? She asked herself out loud. When you were checking your wounds. I figured you would counter my attack, so I had a Bunshin try it instead. Naruto's voice rang out from all around her. Anko smirked and settled back into her ready stance. Using Cage Bunshins to hide your presence. Not bad, Red, but if you're trying to intimidate me, you might as well stop now, 'cause it ain't gonna work, she called confidently. Fair enough. The voices laughed as 20 Bunshins stepped from the trees surrounding the clearing. Only 20? With your reserves, I would have thought you could do much more than that, she said, trying to sound unimpressed by a feat she herself couldn't accomplish, her limit with Cage Bunshins being 10 at most. Oh, we can do more if you want. We just thought this might be enough, but if you don't think so, tajuu Cage Bunshin Jutsu. The Bunshins yelled, before the whole clearing was covered in smoke. When it finally cleared, Anko was surrounded by over 200 Bunshins, all smirking and striking various Kosi poses. This enough, or do you want more? They asked as they all made the cross-shaped hand sign for the jutsu. Nah, I think this will be enough for starters. Don't want you running out of steam and finishing early, now do we? She teased provocatively. The Narutos smirked and released the hand sign. Oh, don't worry about that, we can go for days. Anko grinned wider. Is that so? Well, maybe I'll have to test that out if you manage to win your date. This was too much for some of the Bunshins and they dispelled with massive nosebleeds. Too easy, Anko thought as she dove into the horde and began destroying clones left and right. After almost 10 minutes, she had gotten all but 5 of the Narutos, but she was beginning to get very tired, whilst the Narutos all looked completely fresh and relaxed. You're almost out of Bunshins to hide behind, Red. What are you gonna do once I get rid of these ones? She panted out confidently. The Narutos grinned foxily and formed an all too familiar hand sign. This, tajuu Cage Bunshin Jutsu. They shouted and, as before, Anko found herself surrounded by a multitude of grinning redheads. Oh fuck, Anko said bluntly as she sighed and wearily got into her stance again. Before she could attack, however, the Bunshins all vanished in a huge cloud of smoke and a series of puffs, leaving just one Naruto standing in front of her. Why did you do that? You could have worn me down and won. I could have, but I didn't want to win like that. Not against you. I want to win properly, one-on-one. Anko shook her head and smiled. Alright kid, but you pull this honor shit with an enemy and it'll be your ass, she said sternly as she tried to gather enough energy for a few more minutes. Don't worry, if you were an enemy, I would have taken you out back when my Bunshin snuck up on you to lead you to me, he said confidently as he caught her wrist and forced her to drop her weapon. Oh really? And what makes you think that I didn't notice the Bunshin the whole time? She asked as she freed her wrist and landed a punch to his jaw, sending him stumbling backwards. He shook his head and ducked just in time to avoid Anko's head kick and counter it into a throw. Twisting her body in mid-air, Anko was able to land comfortably on her feet momentarily before she pounced back towards her young opponent. Naruto blocked her attack and used a shunshin to appear behind her where he pulled her into a restraint hold. What if I told you that I actually had 5 Bunshins with you since you entered the forest, a minute after we did and 4 minutes before you said you would? He whispered into her ear as she struggled against his hold. Realizing she couldn't power her way out since he was physically stronger than her, Anko decided to use a different approach. She stopped struggling and moaned Sally as she began to grind her as against him. Her actions resulted in two things happening very quickly. Firstly, Naruto's pants tightened considerably as his body reacted to her gyrations. And secondly, he lost his concentration, which allowed Anko enough wiggle room to escape the hold and reverse their situations, only she had a kunai pressed to his throat. Not bad, Red, but it looks like I win, she whispered into his ear, sending shivers down his spine. She chuckled at his reaction, then released him and pouched her kunai. Naruto growled in frustration and launched a stream of fire at a tree, incinerating it instantly. Whoa, what the fuck? Anko cried as she shielded herself from the intense heat as the tree was reduced to ashes. Where did that come from? And why didn't you use anything but cage bunshin if you knew high-level jutsu like that? She yelled. All of the jutsu I know were taught to me by Tu-san, and he only knows jutsu designed for killing or massive destruction, and I didn't want you to get hurt, so I didn't use any of them, he said softly, hanging his head in shame. Anko sighed irritably. And why did you decide to put that tree out of its misery? She teased. I'm frustrated, okay. You beat me, which means that I have to go back to the fucking academy, which means I can't be your student and you won't want to see me again, since I lost our bet. Anko stared at him for a few moments before her eyes softened. She walked up to him and smacked him hard in the back of the head. Ow, what the fuck? He yelled. That was for holding back when I told you not to. She hit him again. That was for letting me go on several instances when you could have had me. She hit him again. And that is for being an idiot. What did I say you had to do to pass this test? Either evade me for the full 2 hours or land a solid hit on me. Since it's now about 11 and I have at least a cracked rib, you passed on both counts, dumbass. She then draped herself over his shoulder and gave him a kiss on the cheek. And that was for trusting me with your secrets even though you didn't have to. She then pulled back and started to walk away. Naruto, having recovered after a few moments from her smacks and the kiss, called out to her. Wait, where are you going? She turned and grinned. Well, first I've gotta go make sure those two failures haven't been killed or anything while we gone. After that, I've got to report to the Hokage about the results of the test. She paused and her grin grew. Then I'm going home to get ready for our date. You did capture me at one point after all. Naruto just stared at her, slack-jawed and wide-eyed for a full minute before he finally snapped out of it. Really? Why you mean it? He stuttered out disbelievingly, causing Anko to chuckle. Yeah, kid. I expect you to meet me at the Dango restaurant near the Hokage Tower at 1 on the dot, or so help me. I'll fuck you up so bad, even your Tu-san can't fix it. She warned seriously with a dangerous glint in her eye that caused Naruto to gulp and chuckle nervously. Of course, and hi, I mean Anko-sensei. Don't worry, I'll be there for sure. But, if you'll excuse me, I need to get ready. He sputtered out before vanishing using his flame shunshin. Anko laughed and shook her head at the boy's antics. Oh, I'm gonna have fun with him, she thought to herself before using her own shunshin. Sasuke was, for want of a better word, pissed. He had woken up fuzzy for a few moments before he remembered what had happened. So not only was he sore from Anko's beating, but he was probably also going to be sent back to the academy. And worst of all, about 5 minutes after he had woken up, Sakura had also latched onto him and started crying and wailing incomprehensibly. That was half an hour ago, and she was still going. Just before he snapped and killed her, Anko appeared in a swirl of leaves with a superior smirk on her face. Where the hell have you been? The test was supposed to end over an hour ago. Sasuke screamed as he leapt to his feet, knocking over the still crying Sakura. First of all, don't you talk to me like that, you stagnant bucket of horse jizz. I don't give a fuck who your family was, you are nothing but a wannabe genin that just failed my test, so you have absolutely no right to make any demands of me. Second, the reason I am so late is because I got caught up in my fight with Naruto. How come you call him by name but not us? Sakura asked, finally controlling her sobs enough to talk normally. Because, pink shit, he has earned that right. You two on the other hand, don't even deserve to be in my presence. In fact, I'm done with you. You've both failed my test and, as such, will not be on my team. I still have to talk to the Hokage about what will happen to you next, so someone will let you know once he comes to a decision. Until then though, you can just fuck off. I've got better things to do than waste my breath on sorry cunts like you. And with that she disappeared using her shunshin, leaving a furious Uchiha and a once again crying Sakura. Hiruzen Sarutobi was sitting behind his desk giggling like a school girl. Why, you might ask? Well, the answer is simple. He was reading his favorite smutty book and was just getting to a particularly juicy part. Naturally, it was at this precise moment that a slightly miffed Anko arrived in his office. Sorry to bust in like this, Hokage-sama, but she stopped when she realized what it was that he was doing before she arrived. Huh, and here I thought the kid was making that part up, she mumbled mostly to herself. Having nearly had a heart attack when she arrived, the Hokage had now recovered enough to realize what was happened and what he was caught doing. Oh Anko, I can explain about the book, you see. Don't bother, Hokage-sama, Naruto already told me about it, along with a few other things, she said seriously. Sarutobi, having noticed her change in tone, instantly became serious. What exactly did he tell you, Anko? Everything. She answered simply. The Hokage sighed and sat back in his chair. I trust that he told you the conditions for you knowing that information? He asked gravely. Anko simply nodded and the old man sighed again. Listen to me very carefully, Anko. That boy is like a grandson to me, and for whatever reason, he has put his trust in you. And it is not that I don't have faith in you, but know this, if you betray his trust or mine, you will be begging me to send you to hell by the time I'm done with you, understood? He threatened, leaking enough killer intent to make Anko sweat. Hi Hokage-sama, I understand. And I assure you that I will never do anything to betray that trust you two have placed in me, she promised solemnly. Glad to hear it. Now, enough of that, how did the test go? He asked as he stopped the killer intent and brightened visibly. Well, she then told him the details of the test, except for the part about the date. When she was finished, Sarutobi sighed again and rubbed his temples. I see. So Sasuke lacks control and respect. You're right, the best way to fix those would be to put him back in the academy, but I doubt the council will let that happen. Don't worry, whatever happens he definitely won't be on your team, so you won't have to deal with him. Thank you Hokage-sama. I'm not sure if either myself, Naruto or Sasuke would be able to last very long with him on the team. But what of the fangirl? She asked. She is clearly not ready to be a genin, however, I think restricting her from entering the academy may be too much. I shall think about it and decide later. But what is it you want to do with Naruto? Normally when one member of a team fails, the whole team gets sent back to the academy. That's true, but as you know my test isn't about teamwork, but if the individual is ready, and he is. There is no doubt that he is powerful or skilled enough. He held me to a draw practically, but actually could have defeated me several times had he taken the opportunity. Doesn't that show that he lacks the right attitude though? Sarutobi asked. I don't believe so. In that test he may have hesitated or let me go, but as we saw yesterday with the Uchiha, when he is serious he has the right mindset. The old man nodded. Very well, but that doesn't change the fact that genin are supposed to be on a team. That is why I want to take him as my apprentice. Since the traitorous fuck left, I as the only holder of the snake contract, am technically the snake Sanin, which means I can take on an apprentice, and I want Naruto. Sarutobi looked at her for a moment before nodding. Very well. That is technically true, and since you two have already formed a relationship, I suppose that will be fine. The council is going to hate it though, so be prepared for conflict. Anko grinned. Look who you're talking about, me and the Gaki have been catching shit from those bastards for years, this won't be anything new for either of us. The Hokage laughed. I guess you're right, if anyone can take it it's you two. Oh well, fuck it. I am officially approving your request, so, effective immediately, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze is apprenticed to Anko Mitarashi. You may begin your training tomorrow and come see me for a mission when you think that you're both ready. Thank you Hokage-sama. I promise you won't regret this. Well, at least not because of anything we do. I can't speak for all the Fuquads out there. He laughed and shook his head. Thanks Anko. Now you're free to go. I'm sure you want to get ready for your date. he said with a chuckle that turned into full-blown laughter when she flinched and blushed lightly before using the shunshin to leave. Naruto stood outside of the Dango restaurant at 12:50, having been determined not to be late for their date and piss off his somewhat unstable sensei. Unfortunately, since he arrived early, that also meant that he had to wait by himself for a while in front of the building. And for Naruto, standing outside, in one place for a while, was just asking for trouble. And sure enough, after he had been waiting for a little over 5 minutes, he heard the telltale sound of a kunai sailing through the air towards his head. Tilting his head slightly to avoid the projectile, he caught sight of his attacker and immediately was on the ground laughing hysterically. Stalking towards him, in what he assumed was supposed to be a menacing manner, was a man wearing a standard Chunin outfit. Except that is, for the paper bag with eye holes that he had covering his head. "Oh, you think this is funny, you little demon shit?" The masked man demanded angrily. "Are you kidding me? This could be the single funniest thing I've ever seen." Naruto gasped happily as he struggled to contain his laughter. "You bastard. Don't you know who I am? Don't you know what I can do?" Bag man yelled, sounding even angrier than before. "Sorry, but to be fair, it is kind of hard to tell who you are with a paper bag over your head," the boy replied as he finally made it back to his feet. "I'm going to kill you, you filthy son of a whore." His voice cut out when he was driven into the ground by a vicious punch. Naruto stood over the bag man's fallen form with his fist clenched and a dangerous scowl across his face. "Listen here, you piece of shit. I don't give a fuck what anyone says about me, but no one disrespects my family," he roared furiously, raising his hand and charging it with burning demonic chakra. Before he could launch the final attack, his wrist was caught and he turned to find Anko holding it with a scolding look on her face. "That's enough, Naruto. It's time to go," she said sternly. Naruto glared at her for a few moments, before his eyes softened and his hand relaxed, the chakra receding harmlessly. "Fine. But know this, Kakashi, you ever try this shit again and even she won't stop me from finishing you off for good," Naruto promised darkly as he turned to face his, still grounded, assailant. He then turned back to Anko and grabbed her waist, pulling her tight to his body and used his flame shunshin on both of them. Leaving a stunned crowd and a half-angered, half-terrified disgraced former Anbu captain. When they reappeared, Anko gasped as she found herself on top of the Hokage monument. "Sorry about that, Anko-chan. Don't worry about it, Naruto. Everybody has their soft spots, that stupid fuck just happened to be unlucky enough to stumble across yours. In the future though, try to refrain from killing Leaf Nin, even if they are gigantic COC heads and they attacked first. Our team is going to have a hard enough time as it is without having to deal with murder charges too," she said with a smirk. Naruto's eyes nearly burst from his head as what she said sunk in. "You mean Gigi approved us? We can be a team," he cried excitedly. Anko laughed at the sudden change in his demeanor. "That's right, Red. As of this afternoon, you are officially my apprentice," she declared happily. Naruto cheered loudly before stopping abruptly. "Wait, does that mean that we don't have to work with the Uchi fag and his screeching pet?" he asked hopefully. Anko chuckled at the names and nodded. "That's right. You get me all to yourself, big boy. Think you can handle that?" she teased Sally, taking up her favorite position draped over his shoulders and pressing her chest into his back. He used Kawarimi to switch places and get behind her, before wrapping his arms around her stomach and pulled her body flush against his. "Yeah, I think I can handle it, Shisho," he whispered sensually in her ear, making her body tremble from the sensation. Slowly she turned around, her chest now pressed against his, her lips just inches from his. "Is that so? Well then maybe we should see if you truly are capable of handling me," she purred, lowering his mask, her hot breath teasing his eager lips. "And how would we test that?" he asked weakly, his self-control dissolving quickly. "Well," she said thoughtfully, still inches from his face, reveling in the agony she was putting him through. Fate, however, decided to intervene, as they both felt the familiar chakra spike of someone using a shunshin, causing both to sigh grumpily, though neither noticed the other mirroring their action. "Anko-san, Namikaze-san. The Hokage asks that both of you report to his office immediately," the recently appeared Anbu stated plainly before vanishing again. Naruto sighed. Damn, I thought we'd get more time than this. He said quietly as he looked longingly at his sensei's plump lips. Anko caught the look and grinned broadly. Don't sweat it, Red. I'm sure he just wants the explanation behind one of his strongest shinobi getting laid out in the middle of a busy street by a first-day genin. She assured him cheerfully before wrapping an arm around his waist and pulling him flush with her. Now be a good student and use that fancy shunshin of yours to get us there. I feel like resting. Naruto chuckled and wrapped his arms around his teacher. Of course, sensei, I'm always eager to satisfy your desires. He whispered suggestively into her ear before activating the technique and transporting both of them into the Hokage's office with a burst of flames. Ah, oh, it's just you. I swear I'll never get used to that damn shunshin of yours, Naruto. The old man exclaimed, clutching his chest as if having a heart attack. He then noticed the position the two were in and the sultry smile on Anko's face. I hope my summons didn't interrupt anything. He sneered, wiggling his eyebrows suggestively. You know damn well that it did. Now what do you want, old man? I can think of at least a dozen things that I would rather be doing right now other than looking at your wrinkly face. He grumbled angrily. The Hokage quickly schooled his features into his serious face, ignoring the jab at his aged features. Very well. I called you here because I want your side of the story on what happened with Kakashi earlier. I take it that means you've already heard his version. Let me guess. The crazed demon brat lost it and attacked him out of nowhere using his terrible demon powers, which is the only reason he was defeated. Close. Sarutobi nodded, almost word for word. Problem is, this time he has a bunch of civilians that are backing his story, which means I can't just let you off, the old man quietly explained. Naruto sighed. So what's it gonna be this time? Month in solitary? Back to the academy? Or have they finally stopped fucking around and gone for execution? He asked calmly, startling Anko and making the Hokage sigh wearily. They tried for it, but I managed to talk them out of it. Sarutobi said softly as he rubbed his temples to relieve his growing headache. So what's the damage? Naruto asked, his continued calm tone beginning to grate with his hot-blooded sensei. You will be placed on probation and deducted 2 months' pay, which will be awarded to your victim, though we both know that's not why they agreed to that term. The old man spat angrily. I don't understand, Hokage-sama, why would they ask for that? All we are likely to be doing is a few D and C ranks, it's not like that's a lot of money. Anko said, confused. Naruto looked at her blankly. Perhaps, but now that I'm a genin, I'm no longer entitled to the orphan allowance I've been living off. Which means, if I don't get paid, I have no income, and since I have no family to support me, the old bastards are hoping that I'll starve. And I'll bet that they added a condition so Gigi can't help me out, just to be sure. The redhead explained, getting a grim nod from the old Hokage, as Anko started to quake with rage. What kind of bullshit is that? Those old foosers. We should just talk. But her angry rant was cut off when Naruto clamped his hand over her mouth and whispered in her ear. Careful what you say. Those crusty cunts have ears everywhere and they're just waiting for an excuse to get rid of both of us. Anko's eyes widened and she nodded, and he released his hand. I see. I apologize for my outburst, Hokage-sama. She said meekly, though she was clearly still overrun with anger. Under the circumstances, I shall ignore it this time, Mitarashi-san, but be sure it doesn't happen again, the Hokage said in his official voice, whilst giving a small nod to show he knew what Naruto had told her. If that is all, Gigi, may we be excused. I believe that Anko-sensei had some training that she wanted us to do today before it got too late. The Hokage nodded and Naruto shunshined both out of the office and back to the Hokage monument. We're okay up here, you can let it out if you want, he said as he released her and turned to look over the village. How do you put up with it, Naruto? Why haven't you snapped and destroyed this place already? With your demonic powers you'd be more than capable. Naruto sighed. Do you know how many people have been nice to me or even treated me like a human, in my entire life? He asked wearily, keeping his gaze on the village below him. Anko shook her head, then realized he wasn't looking at her and almost smacked herself. No, she said softly. 6. One of whom is dead and another is sealed inside of me. And all of the others live in this village. Anko gasped. So the only reason you haven't destroyed this place is because those 4 people live here. Naruto nodded. Those ignorant fucks don't realize how lucky they are, do they? She asked rhetorically as she looked down at the village with him. Naruto shook his head and grinned. Enough of this depressing shit. Let's go have some fun. He said mischievously, bringing a smirk from his sensei. That's more like it, she declared happily, clapping him on the back, but what to do? Well, we never did end up having that date, how about some dango? The boy suggested slyly. Anko's smirk grew into a feral grin. Kid, keep talking like that and you're gonna have to make an honest woman out of me, she purred with a wink. Gladly, was his reply as he grabbed her suddenly and leapt of the edge of the monument. Anko yelled in surprise and fear as she saw the ground rising towards them rapidly. Moments before they hit, however, Naruto raised his palm and sent out a blast of wind, causing them to slow considerably. He then channeled chakra into his feet, which acted as a cushion when he landed, with Anko cradled in his arms bridal style. Immediately after she determined that they were safe, she punched him hard in the jaw, causing both of them to fall down since he was holding her. You crazy fuck. What the hell was that? She screamed while getting into the mount position and raining down blows on him. After a while, she stopped and looked down at the boy to see him with a wide grin across his battered and bruised face. Anko fought off the urge to gasp when she realized what she had done to him and instead focused on the smug smirk he was directing at her. What the fuck are you smiling at? She yelled, hitting him again. That was so worth it, he said cheerfully after spitting out some blood. What the hell are you talking about? It was worth that beating to hear you squeal and end up in this position, he replied cheerfully. Anko went blank for a moment, before looking down and realizing that in her anger she had straddled his waist and not really noticed. She barked out a laugh and gave him a sultry smile. Now Red, there are much better ways of making me squeal. She paused and ground her hips on his and bit back a moan at the sensation. And some of them include this position, she added thoughtfully. Naruto cursed mentally at having his game thrown back at him and also at the incredible feeling of having a gorgeous woman grind into him. It took all of his willpower to not take her right then and there, but even he was unable to bite back the feral growl when she suddenly stopped and stood up. Oh yeah, she's definitely a keeper, Naruto, don't screw this up. Kyuubi teased, laughing as he watched the woman torture his son. Come on Red, you owe me some dango, remember? She taunted, clearly aware of what she was doing to him and enjoying in it. Begrudgingly, Naruto stood up and looked to his frustrating tease of a sensei. Alright, let's go then, he grumbled. Anko chuckled at his displeasure before turning to him and frowning. Can you do something about your face? As much as I'd like the boost it'd give my reputation, I'd rather not have to look at that mess while I'm eating. Naruto rolled his eyes. Sure, sensei. He then channeled some of his demonic chakra to his brutalized face. Immediately, it was surrounded in a dull red glow, and after it receded it looked as if he'd never been touched. Good as new, he declared happily, earning another chuckle from his sensei. Well, let's go, she declared happily as she stepped to his body, silently telling him to use his shunshin. Naruto shook his head as he wrapped an arm around her and pulled her tighter to his body. You're not getting lazy on me, right, sensei? He teased playfully as he prepared the technique. When my reserves are bigger than yours, I'll do all the taxiing. Until that happens, you'll shut up and do it. Now hurry up, pounding, you made me hungry. Naruto laughed and they disappeared in a swirl of flames. A week had passed since Naruto had become Anko's apprentice, and it had been interesting to say the least. Anko, though confident in his overall ability, was determined to gain a full understanding of his abilities. She had found that, while his Tai and ninjutsu were at least level with hers, his genjutsu was near non-existent. When she asked him why that was, he simply replied that his father-teacher was a gigantic fox with unlimited chakra, so subtlety had never been his specialty. Despite being somewhat disappointed with her student's weakness, she was happy that she could actually teach him something, even if it was her weakest subject also. So for the rest of the week, she had divided their training sessions into teamwork and strategies, where they worked together to fight off a horde of his clones hanged into Kakashi for motivation and basic genjutsu defense, since she only knew academy-level offensive ones and they would be useless against any real opponents. During their first week, they went on several more dates, both of which, like the first, were filled with hearty laughter, disturbing amounts of innuendo and passionate, yet mostly innocent, make-out sessions. That was, until one particular evening. They had been out to Anko's favorite restaurant and then Naruto had taken her back up to the top of the Hokage monument. "What are we doing here, Red?" she asked as she looked around, shivering slightly in the cold night air. Naruto smiled and pulled her into a warm embrace from behind, his natural body heat more than compensating for the chilly breeze at the heightened altitude. "I come up here when I need to get away from everything. I thought it would be nice if we could just enjoy the peace for a while," he replied as he sat down, bringing her into his lap with her back pressed to his chest and his arms still around her waist. Anko felt so secure, so safe in that moment in his arms, that for the first time in almost a decade, she let her defenses drop and snuggled further into his warmth, letting out a contented sigh. Naruto smiled happily as he felt her relax in his hold, honored that she would be willing to do so, since he knew how important defenses were to outcasts like them. After they had been sitting for almost half an hour, Naruto finally reached a conclusion in the internal battle he had been fighting. Gently shifting her so that she was looking into his eyes, he took a deep breath to settle his nerves before he spoke. "Anko-chan, I know that we have only known each other for a few days and have been together for even less, but," he paused as his conviction began to waver, but after looking back into his eyes he continued. "But in that time, I have fallen for you harder and faster than I ever thought possible. I love you," he declared softly, though the conviction and emotion openly written across his face and in his eyes was all the proof Anko needed to tell he was telling the truth. For what seemed like an eternity, the violet-haired woman stared into his eyes silently, an internal battle not unlike the one he had fought earlier raging within her. "What should I do?" she thought. "I know that I have strong feelings for Naruto, but is it love? And if it is, can I really just come out and say it like this? I know that he's not lying about his feelings, and I'm positive that he would never do anything to hurt me intentionally, but even so, can I take such a risk? After all the times that I've been betrayed, am I really ready to put myself out there again?" After more than a minute of silence, Naruto tore his gaze away from the beautiful woman and released his hold on her body, making her shiver at the loss of his warmth. "I'm sorry, Anko-sensei. I shouldn't have said anything so soon. Don't worry, I won." His broken and depressed voice was cut off as she kissed him tenderly on the lips, its chaste nature doing nothing to limit the depth of passion and emotion that were infused into the gentle contact. After a full minute, she pulled back, her amber orbs gazing into their ruby-red counterparts. "I love you too," she stated simply, doing nothing to hide the tears that welled up in her eyes as she allowed herself to release the emotion that she had been suppressing for the better part of her adult life. Caught between unprecedented levels of relief, happiness and shock, Naruto was unable to form words before he pulled his newly declared love into a kiss, this one hungrier and less tender than the last. Anko moaned wantonly as his tongue raided her mouth, exploring every inch and caressing her own into submission. She gasped but gave no resistance when his hands firmly gripped hers, lifting her and positioning her so she straddled his lap. Getting the hint, she ground herself against the noticeable tent in his pants, earning a beastly growl from the young Hanyu. The purple-haired Junin couldn't help but smirk at his reaction, or at least she would have if she wasn't letting out similar sounds thanks to the divine friction that the motion was causing. After a few moments, the feelings of delight turned to frustration as she was unable to progress towards her climax. Breaking their frantic kiss and halting her motions, she pulled back, earning an angry grunt from the horny teen. "This isn't enough, I want more. I want everything," she growled lustily. Are you sure?" Naruto asked sheepishly, his animalistic urges immediately forced to the back of his mind. "Yes, I love you and I want to be with you, whatever that requires," she declared tenderly, sealing the promise with a chaste but loving kiss. "Thank you," he replied simply, pulling her into a warm embrace. Do we have to do that ritual thingy now?" she asked, her voice revealing her underlying impatience. "To-san," Naruto thought. What? I don't need to hear about my son's conquests. Minato replied curtly. That's not what I want. Anko-chan wants to know if we need to do the ritual now, or if we can. Fuck now and leave it till later. Not how I would have worded it, but yeah. Sure. Just make sure you do the ritual within 2 weeks of your first time, otherwise, well, I don't know what will happen, but I'll bet it'll suck. Great. Thanks to San. No problem. Now I'm cutting the connection. I may have been forced into celibacy for the past 13 years, but even I'm not horny enough to watch my son go at it. The demon proclaimed before Naruto's mind went silent. Shaking his head to rid himself of those rather disturbing thoughts, Naruto turned back to Anko, whose look of impatience had only increased while he had been speaking with his father. Well, what did he say? She asked, having come to recognize the telltale signs of her student having a conversation with his tenant. Tu-san says as long as we complete the ritual within 2 weeks, it's not a problem, and that he won't be watching. Anko's eyes widened since she hadn't thought of that before. Her face settled into a mischievous smirk. That's too bad. I've never been afraid of exhibitionism, not to mention I used to have a crush on the Yondaime. Father and son, she muttered thoughtfully, her eyes glazing over slightly with fantasies. Are you trying to kill the mood? 'Cause I can tell you if you keep talking about Tu-san, my part of this is going to be a lot more difficult. He explained, giving a thrust of his hips to prove his point. The firm contact through their clothes pulled Anko from her musings and she had to bite her lip to suppress a moan. Okay, fuck that, let's do this. She declared, unceremoniously taking off her coat. Lemon start. Any problems that Naruto might have been having getting into the mood were violently stomped out as he laid his eyes on the glorious form of Anko Midarashi's chest. In a flash, his animal side took over and her fishnet shirt was ripped from her body thanks to instinctively grown claws. Anko gasped at the sudden action, but it quickly turned to a moan as he began lavishing attention on her painfully erect nipples, bringing one into his mouth to be suckled and nibbled at whilst the other pert bud was pinched and rolled with his hand. His other hand refused to lay idle and slid up her scandalously short skirt, ripping away her panties as it firmly gripped and kneaded her supple as. Anko threw her head back and screamed in pleasure at his rough actions, loving the passion and intensity that he was showering upon her. Her volume only increased as he capitalized on her exposed neck and began to nip and suck at the sensitive flesh near her collar. Her moans and cries continued to grow and intensify for several minutes before she was taken over by the burning desire radiating from her core. Pulling away from his fervent ministrations, she paused for only a moment before setting her hands desperately to the task of removing the cloth obstacles that were keeping her from his manhood and her prize. Cursing the apparent complexity of the opening to his pants, she almost cheered as his strong hands pulled hers away and completed the task, freeing his throbbing member to the cool night air and making her gasp slightly at the size of it. Oh, we are going to have some fun, she declared, though Naruto was unsure if she was speaking to him, or his COC. Deciding he didn't care either way, he grabbed her by the hips and lifted her soaked core over his eager soldier. Looking to her face for confirmation, he saw only love, lust and impatience, so he paused no more before bringing her down upon him, impaling her on his and making both of them release pleasured howls into the night sky. Anko laid her head on his chest, wordlessly telling him she needed a moment to adjust, and despite the overwhelming urge to do otherwise, Naruto remained perfectly still, waiting longingly for his love to adjust so that they could continue. After a few moments they both felt Anko's body relax and the snake mistress gave an experimental roll of her hips, drawing more pleasured moans from both of them as the delicious sensations rocketed through their bodies. Impatient as ever, the purple-haired woman quickly began to pick up the pace, raising her hips before dropping back down once she reached the tip of his rod. As they continued, Naruto once again took control, gripping her hips tightly and lifting her before slamming her back down with a wet smack as their bodies collided. Anko threw her head back and cried out, inadvertently raising her breast to Naruto's face, an offering that the half-demon could not and would not refuse. Continuing his rhythm with his hands, the redhead brought his mouth down, latching onto one of her nipple and drawing it into his hungry cavern. Her pleasured cries turned to surprised gasps momentarily as he began to nibble and suckle on it, repeating his earlier motions, though on the opposite side this time. Their ceaseless pounding continued for several more minutes before they both felt the approach of their climaxes, announced loudly by Anko's sporadic shrieks and moans, and Naruto's pleasured grunts and growls. The redhead let out a throaty roar as his COC twitched violently before unleashing a torrent of hot cum into his lover's core, only moments before she too came, mixing their fluids as her walls clamped and spasmed, milking him dry. For several minutes that sat together, Naruto still against the tree and Anko still perched on his lap, her head resting on his chest, being soothed by his strong heartbeat as it slowed to a calm standing rate. Naruto smiled warmly as he realized she had fallen asleep and created a cage bunshin, who covered them with their coats before dismissing itself, as he too was lulled into a peaceful slumber. Morning came and the new lovers were awoken abruptly when Naruto sensed someone approaching and created a dozen cage bunshins, the puffing noise of their summoning enough to awaken Anko, who smiled at him before tensing as she saw the look on his face. "What's the matter, Narukoi?" she asked, looking around and seeing his squad of clones taking up defensive positions. "Someone is coming and I don't recognize their signature," he replied quietly, getting a nod from Anko, who made to stand up before realizing she was only wearing her skirt. Looking around, she found Naruto's coat laying next to them where it had apparently been used as a quilt to cover them in the night, and quickly pulled it on as she stood and got into her own ready position, though any intimidation factor was lowered significantly by her disheveled appearance and the far too big coat swimming on her slender frame. Both of them visibly relaxed when the form of one of the Hokage's Anbu guards appeared in front of them. "Anko Mitarashi, Naruto Namikaze. The Hokage requests your presence in his office in 15 minutes. The masked shinobi stated flatly, though the young couple would swear that they saw him stifle a snicker at their appearance. "We'll be there, now fuck off, goat boy," Anko ordered, poking fun at the man's odd choice for the animal on his mask. The goat Anbu seemed to huff indignantly before he vanished in a swirl of leaves, drawing chuckles from both of the young couple. "Well, I think we should go home and have a shower and change, especially since someone decided it was a good idea to half of my favorite outfit to shreds," Anko declared, leveling a glare at Naruto, who only shrugged. "Hey, I didn't hear you complaining at the time," he replied nonchalantly, earning him a whack to the back of his head. "Be that as it may, we still both need to shower and I need to change. You can just shower at my place since it will save time," the Junin ordered as she grabbed her coat off the ground and stepped to her half-nod student. "If you insist," he replied with a lusty grin before wrapping his arms around her, leaving his hands firmly gripping her brias as he used his shunshin. Half an hour and one shower, love-making session later, found them standing in the Hokage's office, having received a summons from the old man to meet him immediately. "It's about damn time you two. I had hoped that you weren't with Kakashi long Ino. What happened to you two?" Sarutobi asked, having finally looked up and seen the state that the young lovers were in. Though you couldn't see any of Naruto's skin, Anko's was more than enough to tell the story. Her neck and the exposed parts of her chest were covered in hickeys and love bites. Her thighs had hand-shaped bruise marks where someone had obviously been gripping onto her quite tightly, and her cheeks were flushed as if she had just run 10 miles, despite the fact that they arrived using Naruto's shunshin. It wasn't hard for the Hokage and his assistants to figure out what had happened, and a perverted grin stretched onto the elderly leader's face. "I see that I have interrupted your training again. I seem to be doing that a lot lately," Sarutobi sneered, waggling his eyebrows in what Naruto had labeled the arrow Gigi look. "Can the perverted crap Gigi, why did you bring us here?" Naruto asked, obviously not happy about the interruption to continue their earlier activities. "We've had a request for a mission from a client. The description he gave puts it as AC rank escort, but frankly I think he's full of shit," the Hokage said bluntly, surprising both of the nin in front of him. "You think it's a trap of some kind?" Anko asked skeptically, her serious mode quickly settling in. "Not necessarily, but he's definitely hiding something. I have accepted the request, but that has left me with a bit of a problem. You can't send a strong team because he'll get suspicious and we might miss what he's planning, but you can't send a fresh genin team because the mission is likely to be too tough for them," Naruto explained seriously. The Hokage nodded, not surprised by the boy's impressive insight. "That's right, Naruto. And it's why I would like to send you too. Anko has assured me that you are more than capable of taking Junin level assignments. Yet due to your rank as a new genin, putting you on a C rank together won't be suspicious. Plus it might prove to be a good test for your team's capabilities. Naruto grinned widely and looked to Anko, who mirrored his expression. Okay, we'll handle it, Anko declared confidently. The old man chuckled at their eagerness. Glad to hear it. Bring in the client, he called to his secretary. Moments later, a hunched old man with the distinct stench of sake staggered into the room. This is my protection. They look like they just fucked in the closet, he slurred, looking the two nin up and down, paying particular focus to Anko's assets, at which point he grew a perverted grin. Naruto let loose a feral growl and clenched his fists tightly. Listen carefully, you decrepit sack of shit, if you want to keep your eyes, I suggest you take them off my sensei. Now. The young man threatened darkly, making everyone in the room stiffen except Anko, who chuckled and playfully whacked him on the back of his head. Bad Red. No threatening the client, even if he is skating on thin ice, she said playfully at first and then darkly as she turned a glare to the old drunk. Said drunk shook his head slightly to wave off his momentary stupor. Whatever. My name is Tazuna. Your job is to protect me until I can finish the bridge I'm building. Meet me at the gate in an hour. I don't have time to waste with your bullshit. Naruto growled again and Anko put a pacifying hand on his shoulder. We'll be there. But you do well to watch your tone, old man. The kid here has a bit of a short fuse and I can't always hold him back, Anko warned, causing the bridge builder to gulp nervously and the Hokage to stifle a chuckle as he realized what they were doing. As soon as the client had left, all three of them lost control and burst out laughing. Did you see the look on his face? Man, I almost lost it for a second there, Anko gasped out, trying to regain her composure. Well, at least it should be easy to get the truth out of him now. Maybe I should get you two working interrogation together. With Anko's reputation and experience in Naruto's demonic attributes, even the hardest veterans wouldn't stand a chance, the Hokage joked half seriously. Naruto shrugged. We'll talk when we get back. See you later, Gigi. Naruto waved excitedly before leaving in his trademark fire swirl. I've really gotta get him to teach me that, Anko muttered as she left using the standard leaf shunshin. Sarutobi chuckled lightly before looking out his window to his village. Good luck, you two. There is more at work here than you know, the old man said ominously. Thanks for listening. In the next part. In the meantime, please leave a review. I would love to hear your feedback, especially if it helps me improve the overall story.